With the impending release of Dragon Quest XI's Echoes of an Elusive Age Definitive Edition, and ports of the first 3 games in the series coming to Switch, now seems as good a time as any to revisit the mainline entries in a franchise that has been synonymous with Japanese role-playing games for over 30 years. In this retrospective, we will highlight the release details and gameplay changes of Dragon Quest 1 through 9, and then add in our personal impressions of each title. Note that we will not look at Dragon Quest X, given that it has yet to be released in the West and also represents a significant departure for the series given its MMO structure. If you enjoy this video, please keep your eyes on NWR TV for our review of Dragon Quest XI's, and a special feature looking at the choice between playing in 2D versus 3D in that title. Without further ado, here's Neil with the first entry in this quintessential series.
33 years ago, Dragon Quest debuted on the Famicom. It wasn't an immediate success, but in short order, Dragon Quest became a huge hit in Japan, primarily because of the bold innovation of director Yuji Horíi's work. The idea spun out of Horíi's previous game, Portopia, which was a visual novel that experimented with a menu-based command system, one that would be familiar to early adopters of the Dragon Quest games. Wizardry and Ultima also fueled Horíi's work with the studio Chunsoft. The special sauce that helped the initial breakthrough was the focus on making the game less dense in statistics and more focused on storytelling, something that was aided by Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama's artwork and noted composer and war crimes denier, unfortunately, Koichi Sugiyama's memorable soundtrack. The original Dragon Quest was also helped out immensely by being the first of its kind. The eventual success in Japan meant an English localization made sense, and Nintendo wound up working closely with Enix to make it happen. The late Satoru Iwata wound up working with Horii to bring over Dragon Warrior, a name change necessitated by an American Dragon Quest project that previously existed. The game was nominally improved, most notably with saves no longer requiring a password, and Dragon Warrior launched in the summer of 1989. It unfortunately launched with a relative thud, and the next year Nintendo Power would literally give the game away to subscribers. That helped the series debut eke out a respectable sales number in the West, but it definitely did not set the world on fire as Enix and Nintendo might have hoped. At this point, the story of the development is probably more interesting than the game itself. It's simple and straightforward. You play as Erdrick, or Lodo in some localizations, fighting through scores of enemies all by your lonesome. There are no parties here. The quest is to save the princess and defeat the vile Dragon Lord. The simplicity is charming, even if age shines through 30 years later. Remakes and ports over the years have improved the Famicom beginnings, most notably the Game Boy Color remake being probably the best. You can currently play it on mobile devices and on Switch, potentially by the time you hear this, as it's out the same day as Dragon Quest XI. My memories of Dragon Quest exist purely in Dragon Warrior form, as I received the NES version as a gift sometime in the early 90s. This was my first exposure to the series, and even less than 10 years after its creation, it felt really old. But there was something undeniably alluring about the world and the quest. It was not a game I binged heavily, but something I kept coming back to over the course of many months. I have faint memories of finishing the game and being baffled by the Dragon Lord's offer for you to team up with him and rule the world together. Sorry, it's a 30-year-old spoiler. I remember being satisfied by the whole journey, though. Maybe, just maybe, I'll revisit it on Switch and strive to recall the warm feelings from more than 20 years ago.
Dragon Quest II: Luminaries of the Legendary Line was released for the Famicom on January 26, 1987, and made its way to the West in September of 1990 under the name Dragon Warrior II. Early stages of development began just 1 month prior to the release of the first title, with the goal of expanding upon what the original had to offer. And it would do just that with a few key changes to the battle system, primarily adding more playable party members. The story takes place 100 years after the events of Dragon Quest I. An evil wizard named Hargon seeks to summon the demon Malroth in hopes of destroying the world. After the destruction of Moonbrook Castle, the Prince Loto, who is a descendant of Erdrick, is tasked with preventing Hargon's plans from coming to fruition. Starting the quest on his own, he's eventually joined by 2 of his cousins. The 3 fight together to overcome the challenges placed in front of them, including setting sail across the open waters to new continents as they search for Hargon. The most obvious and game-changing addition is having multiple party members. Dragon Quest I had a lone hero, but in 2, we now have a party of 3, vastly increasing the amount of strategy and thought needed in combat. Unlike many RPGs of the time, you don't start with a full group, but instead gain members as you set out on your journey. However, your party isn't the only one to increase. Battles now feature groups of enemies instead of a single foe. In addition to that, players can now sail around a much larger world, giving the experience of a much more open world feel. More items are introduced alongside a new way to hold them, with each character having their own personal inventory. Although my experience with early Dragon Quest games is pretty limited, I do remember vastly preferring the sequel to the first title. While there is a novelty in the simplicity of Dragon Quest I, the addition of multiple party members makes it feel far superior. Taking on groups of enemies feels more rewarding, and seeing the big improvements brought by the development team's second go at the series is really cool to witness.
Concluding the first Dragon Quest trilogy is Dragon Quest III, first launching in Japan on Famicom in 1988 before its eventual North American NES release in 1992. A Super Famicom remake hit Japan in 1996, and a really well done Game Boy Color port made it over to America in 2001. Since then, Dragon Quest III has been harder to come by in the West, only coming to mobile devices back in 2014, in spite of re-releases on Wii Virtual Console, 3DS, and PlayStation 4 in Japan. Thankfully, that will change on the day Dragon Quest XI comes to Switch, as Dragon Quest III, with the subtitle The Seeds of Salvation, is coming to the system as well. And that's a welcome re-release, as Dragon Quest III is easily the most modernly playable entry from the Erdrick trilogy. This is actually a prequel to the first two games, following the hero, referred to as Erdrick in most English localizations, and Loto in Japan, on their quest to defeat the demon lord Baramos. The plot ties into the first two games, but for the most part is far enough away from those two not to be intimately dependent on them. Locations in Dragon Quest III feature a lot of similarities with Earth's actual locales, including the Rome-inspired Romali and the American-esque town Newtown. The class system introduced here is likely the biggest addition. While your hero will always be of the hero class, your three other companions can be warriors, fighters, jesters, thieves, and more, with the ability to change them later in the game for multi-classing opportunities. Notable here is the fact that you just made these party members from scratch. Those newer to the Dragon Quest series might recognize a similar concept from Dragon Quest IX. Aside from the class system, the battle system is just far more flexible and diverse, with new stats and options. A day-night cycle also brings more depth to the world, which is more open than ever before. I have a lot of faint, far-off memories of Dragon Quest III. The last time I touched it was borrowing a copy of the Game Boy Color version some 15 years ago. My affinity for Dragon Quest more or less started here just slowly. I had played the original game on NES, but didn't really dig the series that much until this game and Dragon Warrior Monsters on Game Boy. But 3 seems to be the point where the developers seem to nail the formula, allowing for them to experiment and iterate more on the very idea of RPGs in the next trilogy of games.
Dragon Quest IV was originally released on NES in late 1992, and it would turn out to be the last one in the West until 2001's Dragon Quest VII. It would be remade for PlayStation also in 2001, but this version never left Japan. A second remake, this time for Nintendo DS, did come to the West in 2008, and this DS version is the basis for the mobile port that debuted in 2014. Like its subtitle, Chapters of the Chosen, suggests, Dragon Quest IV diverges from the previous 3 entries in the series by being a collection of chapters, each starring a different character. The hero's chapter is the 5th one, with the earlier 4 told from the perspective of his future companions. Unlike a typical RPG, here you meet all of the supporting cast first, and then the protagonist. But this allows each of the companions to feel more fully realized and memorable, since they have their own objectives and goals to achieve before they can join the hero. This narrative structure is seldom used. Mother 3 is another title that employs it, in spite of the fact that chapter-based RPGs seem to have become more popular as of late. Chapters of the Chosen also introduced a number of gameplay elements that would go on to become staples of the mainline Dragon Quest series. The casino was introduced, which allowed players to gamble on slot machines, poker, and monster fights. Extra characters not in the current party stayed in the wagon, which traveled alongside you on the overworld map. What would become mini-medals also started here. Finally, the tactics menu allowed players to focus on controlling a given protagonist, while their teammates followed strategies such as healing, saving MP, or focusing on damage. Of course, you could also control your teammates manually if you wanted. I went on a bit of a Dragon Quest bender after 7 and 8 were brought to 3DS. I ended up playing 4, 5, and 6 one after another, but because I started with 4, and because of its unique narrative structure, it's always stood out to me as a special game in the mainline series. Even though every entry seemed to have a neat hook to it, few RPGs have ever shown the spotlight on side characters as much as Dragon Quest IV. It works especially well given that Dragon Quest main characters are generally blank slates that play in a very similar way across each game, so meeting this hero a little bit later in the experience feels like an important moment you build up to. While it's not my favorite in the series, Chapters of the Chosen has a style that I will always really appreciate and hope to see more of.
I'll always look at Dragon Quest V with a little bit of what if, as this was the first entry in the series to not release in the West on its original console. The Super Famicom version launched in Japan in 1982, the same year Dragon Quest III came to America. This will always be a shame because Dragon Quest V is easily one of the best games in the series, and quite possibly, in my opinion, one of the greatest RPGs of all time. But before we get to that, let's hit on when it finally came to America. It took 17 years before Dragon Quest V launched outside of Japan, coming to DS in 2009. Finally, in 2015, it came to mobile platforms. To this day, it has never been released on a home console outside of Japan. Dragon Quest V is the whole life story of its hero. You begin with your hero as a 6-year-old traveling with his dad. Without delving too far into spoilers, you follow your boy hero up through his teenage years, his courtship of his future wife, and then adventuring with his family and kids. While other RPGs, even in this era, had stronger narratives, the holistic way that this game takes you on your hero's life quest is just kinda stunning and beautiful. There's something immensely special about playing through the final area with your party being made up of your wife and your 2 kids. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Gameplay-wise, Dragon Quest V just keeps on keeping on with the turn-based combat staples. Monster capturing originated here, which directly influenced the Dragon Quest Monsters spin-off series, as well as likely indirectly inspiring Pokemon. Other than that, refinement was the focus of the first Super Famicom entry in the series. Weapons like boomerangs and whips were able to hit more than one enemy. Tactics AI was vastly improved, and you didn't need to bounce through a menu to open chests or talk to people. The elements that were distinctive to Dragon Quest V stood out boldly from the rest of the series, though. Like its predecessor, it somewhat dealt in chapters, but each one was just a different era of your hero's life. As your boy became a man, you had the choice between 2 developed female characters to be your wife, with a 3rd added in the DS remake, giving a stronger element of player choice to a decidedly plot formulaic series. I first came across Dragon Quest V in 2009, when I reviewed the DS remake. It had been several years since I really touched anything Dragon Quest related, and I only fell into the review because noted Dragon Quest Dr. Jonathan Metz had retired from video game reviews. Dragon Quest V rocked my face off, and I fell deep in love with the game and its gripping video game narrative, enjoyable combat, and rad monster recruitment. If you play just one Dragon Quest game, it should probably be Dragon Quest XI on Switch. But if you have time for a second one, Dragon Quest V is one well worth checking out. It's easily the best of the older era of the series.
Dragon Quest VI: Realms of Revelation came to the Super Famicom in 1995 and marked a few significant events in the series. It was the first game not developed by Chunsoft, and it concluded what is referred to as the Zenithian trilogy, which references a floating castle that appears in Dragon Quest IV, V, and VI. Realms of Revelation wouldn't find its way into the hands of Western players until the 2011 remake for Nintendo DS, but that year was a boon to Dragon Quest fans as remakes of the 4th and 5th entries were also released worldwide. The story of Dragon Quest VI, to the surprise of no one, revolves around a hero attempting to save the world. Where this entry diverges is in its use of amnesia and 2 worlds that the characters travel back and forth between, the dream world and the real world. In more typical JRPG fashion, the hero encounters new characters along his journey who join him on his and their quest to rid the world of a dragon named Murdaugh, and recover their memories in the process. Special warp points, and sometimes just stairs in the overworld, allow you to move from one world to the other in order to advance the story or complete quests. Making a welcome return to Realms of Revelation is the class system of Dragon Quest III and VII, with 6 as being more similar to the latter. At All Trades Abbey, characters can be put into one of 9 starter classes such as Warrior or Dancer that affect how their stats change and what abilities they learn. Mastering multiple classes by fighting a set number of battles with each one opens up powerful hybrid classes like Luminary and Ranger. The wagon for excess party members also appears in Dragon Quest VI, and now the characters within it can cast magic even though they aren't in your active party. You can also recruit slimes that you find throughout your adventure and have them compete at Slimeopolis, in arena-style combat that rewards you with prizes. For me, Dragon Quest VI is a difficult entry to remember, considering its narrative hook isn't all that unique and the structure is fairly pedestrian. In a more positive sense, it's JRPG comfort food, and it helps make the case for the Nintendo DS as the best RPG system of all time. As I mentioned, in playing the 4th and 5th and 6th games within a few months of each other, I had a great opportunity to directly compare them, and there's no question that the story of 5 and the narrative structure of 4 are more interesting than what 6 brings to the table. Of course, the class system is one of the highlights of the Dragon Quest series, and the fact that you don't need to put in 20 hours before you open it up, Dragon Quest VII, I'm looking at you, means you have access to a very compelling gameplay system early on. While it's certainly worth playing, Realms of Revelation is a middle-of-the-road entry in a storied franchise that fans of the series will enjoy, despite the fact that it doesn't really break any new ground.
Dragon Quest VII Fragments of the Forgotten Past is an interesting beast and easily one of the most overlooked titles in the series. Released on August 26, 2000 in Japan and October 31, 2001 in the States, its appearance was strange timing considering the PlayStation 2 had already been released in both territories. Of course, the PS2 was backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1, but gamers at the time were more keen on visuals and quite frankly, Dragon Quest VII's graphics were lackluster. The project was originally planned to be a Nintendo 64 DD game, but on January 15, 1997, the shift to PlayStation was announced. Enix cited a larger market and the lower cost of CDs as the primary reasons for the change. A 3DS port was also made available in North America on September 16, 2016. This title would mark the final entry in the series to carry the Dragon Warrior title in the West, with subsequent games keeping the Dragon Quest namesake. Infamous for its astronomical length, Dragon Quest VII's structure is a bit different from previous games. Instead of exploring large continents, you travel to different small islands from the past that are no longer in the present world. Once there, you learn about the island and its inhabitants as you slowly uncover the truth of the island's impending doom. Naturally, you are able to alter the course of history, saving and restoring the island in the present time. This method of storytelling lends itself to many smaller plots tied together by the narrative of restoring the world to its former glory, which may or may not be a good thing depending on how grandiose of a tale you're looking for. From a gameplay perspective, Dragon Quest VII didn't bring anything that would be considered groundbreaking to the series. Yuji Horii stated that the team was focused more on puzzle solving than the game's story, which is supported by the collection of smaller plots found within each island. Battles are still 2D and took place in the first-person perspective, while exploration was 3D. However, sprites were still used, which was a point of contention with fans who argued that Final Fantasy VII had polygonal character models and was released 3 years earlier. The ability to talk to party members was a new addition which could be used to garner advice for battle tactics, plot points, or little one-offs of how they were feeling at that particular point in time. 7 was the first Dragon Quest game I saw the credits roll on, and while many wouldn't suggest this be an entry point into the series, I'm glad it was mine. Although I had dabbled with a number of other games prior, I absolutely fell in love with the structure of visiting islands and learning about their way of life. Bringing them all back to the world felt amazing as you were piece by piece building this beautiful and diverse world. Sure, it isn't a perfect game and its drawn-out structure is enough to turn off some, but those willing to put in the time will get to experience a true gem.
Dragon Quest VIII: Journey of the Cursed King originally released in North America at the end of 2005 on the PlayStation 2. Even though Dragon Quest VIII on 3DS had fully 3D environments, the PS2 release of Dragon Quest VIII was actually the first title in the series to include them. This version was developed by Level 5 of Professor Layton and Dark Cloud fame under the watchful eye of series creator Yuji Horii, and they would also go on to develop the following game, Dragon Quest IX: Sentinels of the Starry Skies. Dragon Quest VIII would go on to receive a 3DS port at the beginning of 2017, which featured a number of changes from the PS2 version. The plot of Dragon Quest VIII centers on the kingdom of Trodain, whose king, princess, and other inhabitants are transformed by the court jester Dulmagus. A single guard is unaffected and becomes the hero character of this adventure. Along with the other playable characters, including a few bonus ones in the 3DS version, the cursed king, princess, and hero set out to find Dulmagus and attempt to release Trodain from his spell. Of course, there is much more to the story that you discover as you make your way through, and primarily for this reason Dragon Quest VIII is regarded as one of the best in the series, standing toe-to-toe with Dragon Quest V. With its release on PS2, Dragon Quest VIII's most significant change was the move to 3D visuals. No longer would players move from the overworld map to individual cities and dungeons with their own 2D environments. Another major difference between the PS2 and 3DS versions is that while the PS2 game had traditional random encounters, the 3DS one did not. In the 3DS port, all enemies could be seen in the overworld and battled by running into them. Two features new to the series with this 8th entry were the tension system and the alchemy pot. In combat, a character could use the Psych Up command to increase their tension, thus multiplying the damage of their next attack. The alchemy pot is essentially the crafting system of the series, and allows players to combine various ingredients to create equipment and items, after finding recipes from bookshelves, that is. Characters also gained skill points at level up that gave players the chance to customize the weapons and abilities of those characters. I didn't play Dragon Quest VIII until it came to 3DS in January of 2017, a few months after Dragon Quest VII came to 3DS. Playing the two games back to back compelled me to compare the two experiences, and unlike many people, I actually prefer the world building and job system of 7 to the perhaps more traditional JRPG gameplay of 8. I will concede that the story and characters of Dragon Quest VIII are excellent, and of course the pacing is much better than its immediate predecessor. All in all, Journey of the Cursed King is RPG comfort food. It's accessible, interesting, and fun to play. It stands near the top of the series in the hearts and minds of Dragon Quest fans, and it appeared on 2 of the best-selling consoles of all time. In a sea of 3DS RPGs, Dragon Quest VIII is absolutely worth owning and even revisiting. It's a memorable title, even if it's not my absolute favorite. The 9th entry in the mainline series, Sentinels of the Starry Skies, was published by Nintendo and released outside of Japan in July of 2010. As previously mentioned, it was developed by Level 5 and came only to the Nintendo DS, a system that was well into its lifespan by that point. In a lot of ways, Dragon Quest IX is a departure for the series in that it has never been re-released in any form, including mobile. The story of Dragon Quest IX can be considered a little more convoluted than that of other Dragon Quest games. It involves a kingdom in the sky known as the Observatory and its inhabitants who are called Celestrians, the protagonist being one among them. The Celestrians are striving to reach a place called the Realm of the Almighty, and to accomplish this task they must retrieve figs that grow on the legendary Tree of Life, Yggdrasil. But first the tree must be rejuvenated by helping people who live down below in what's called the Protectorate. The primary thrust of the game is the hero's journey throughout the Protectorate on a quest to help people and collect these fruits that will allow the Celestrians to finally get to the Realm of the Almighty. There's much more to the actual plot, but it's worth experiencing for yourself. One major gameplay shift occurs in Dragon Quest IX that connects with another significant change: cooperative multiplayer and character customization. If multiple players each have their own cartridge, they can link up wirelessly on the Nintendo DS to join each other's games. They can also customize the protagonist's gender and appearance in much more detail than any other Dragon Quest game. Unfortunately, 2 other unique features are either completely or basically dead. One was the Wi-Fi shop, which allowed you to purchase treasure maps and special items by connecting your game to the internet. This one became inaccessible after Nintendo terminated the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection in 2014. The second was called Tag Mode, which was almost a precursor to Street Passing on the 3DS. It wirelessly exchanged data with other Dragon Quest IX owners when the DS was in sleep mode, provided that you were in the same physical location. Ultimately, the launch experience of Dragon Quest IX is not quite the one you would have today, and this could be a reason why it's not yet been ported or remade. While I do recall playing Dragon Quest IX at or around its release, for one reason or another I never finished it. Its difficulty may have ended up being the culprit. According to a 2009 Kotaku article, Yuji Horii states, "We make the game to be quite hard. It's harder than any of the previous titles and the enemies are also powerful. We strengthen the bosses, stuff like that." End quote. By the time I finished Dragon Quest VIII, I think I was ready to move away from the series for a little bit. In that time since, I did pick up a used copy of Dragon Quest IX, and I hope to see it through one day. I think I'm a little bit put off by the fact that you create your own party of characters rather than acquiring them by gradually moving through the story. But replaying Dragon Quest III in the coming days will see me doing this anyways, so maybe I'll develop a taste for it. We may never see a Dragon Quest MMO leave Japan, but fortunately there are 10 other wonderful RPGs that uphold tradition and experiment with gameplay and narrative mechanics to unique and varied results. In just a few short days, Switch owners will be able to start or continue their Dragon Quest XI's journey, and it looks like they are in for one of the most memorable experiences of 2019. Whether you've never played a Dragon Quest game, or still remember when they were called Dragon Warrior, there are numerous reasons to track down these games and play them through on your system of choice. The 3DS alone allows you to experience Dragon Quest IV through 9, and after September 27, the other 4 titles will be playable on Switch. Thanks to everyone for watching, and if you like this video and want to see more Dragon Quest coverage, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Stay tuned for more Dragon Quest content coming very, very soon.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.